Hello, how are you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Are Rugby closing in on a deal with Netflix to have a documentary around the Six Nations? Think Formula One, Drive to Survive, but for rugby in the Six Nations. Something which I think could potentially be huge for the sport if it's done in the right way. That's what I'm going to get into in this video, talk about why overall it is a good thing, but they have to get it right. If you are new here, do subscribe to the channel, like the video, and drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think of the whole idea of having a rugby documentary. We've had some before, but a kind of series on Netflix or something like that, that sort of style. Do drop a comment down below and let me know what you think. All right, let's get into it. This is a story which is in a couple of the papers today here in the UK. I saw it was in the Daily Mail, in the Daily Mirror as well, in terms of talking about Netflix closing in on a deal to do a kind of documentary series like with Formula One Drive to Survive around the Six Nations. So it would follow every team, get behind the scenes access and kind of tell the narrative of the competition and of those teams in that kind of series style, which, as I said in the intro, I think anyone watching this who is a rugby fan will say that that is a really, really good thing. But I do think it needs to be done in the right way, and I'm going to get onto what I mean by that in this video because it's really, really important. So as I say, Netflix are the company that has been mentioned. I think that's good. I think it's important that it is on one of the big streaming platforms, whether it's Netflix or Amazon Prime, whatever it may be. It needs to be accessible to an awful lot of people, because actually there have been quite a few documentaries before around rugby, but maybe they just kind of get seen by a rugby audience rather than that kind of wider appeal, which is something that Formula One's Drive to Survive has been able to do really, really brilliantly. I never used to be interested in Formula One. I still don't particularly follow the sport, but I have watched Formula One Drive to Survive, and that has been a really big driving force in the commercial appeal, growing that sport over the last few years. Now, interestingly, I've read both the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror's reports on this today, and they said that Toto Wolff, who's the team principal of the Mercedes F1 team, and George Russell, the British driver as well, have been having Zoom meetings and conversations with rugby players, with coaches, with personnel within the game of rugby, sort of explaining it from their point of view. And the reason that that is significant is because Mercedes were actually the team that refused to take part in the first season of Drive to Survive. And they since saw how popular it was, saw how successful it was, and changed their minds on that. And I think there will be an element of resistance within rugby. Normally, as a sport, generally we kind of come kicking and screaming excuse me, into the modern world with these sorts of decisions. It's a traditional sport, rugby. Its values are very important to it, and so something incredibly modern like this I think will be met with a certain level of resistance. And also, rugby is a sport which still hasn't embraced the idea of the athletes being stars. It's all about the team and the collective and the culture and things like that. So in some ways it goes in opposition to what a Drive to Survive style documentary on rugby and on the Six Nations will want to do. So I think that's interesting that they are involved in those talks, but it's important to remember that Mercedes, who were the best side in Formula One when the best team I should say, in Formula One when that documentary series first started, they refused to be part of it, but then they saw the benefits of it. I think that's really interesting that they could be having discussions with people within the game of rugby. Also worth mentioning that apparently this is being driven by CVC, who some of you may well remember as the private equity that bought into the Six Nations. They also bought into the Gallagher Premiership and loads of other competitions and around the world in terms of rugby. They're very invested in the game. We haven't really seen much of them so far, so they bought a 14.3% stake in the Six Nations for £365 million, that is, in 2021. They haven't really done that much, have they, in all honesty? I think a lot of people have been pretty underwhelmed by their input. We haven't heard from them. They don't particularly seem to be accountable on what exactly they're doing, but they used to be invested in Formula One. They know the benefits of a series like this. They have knowledge of how to drive the commercial value of a sport, which ultimately is how they're going to see a return on their money. And let's make no mistake, private equity will be interested in making a return on their original investment, which has been pretty sizable so far in the game. So could this finally be something that they are able to bring to the table? They'll certainly know the benefits of it. And speaking of those benefits, well, obviously overall growing the game. And in the articles that I have read, it has said that it's not necessarily about making money straight away, but it's about growing the game and appealing to a wider audience, particularly an audience outside of Europe. You think about Drive to Survive, and that has done a lot, as I understand it, for Formula One in America. America is an audience which rugby is desperate to try and crack into. They've got the World Cup, the Men's World Cup there in 2031. It is an area of the world and somewhere that's seen as real potential and real growth for rugby. So if a documentary like this can help with that, then again, I think that is a benefit, and that is something they will be focusing on. But in terms of appealing to a wider audience, it's absolutely crucial. It can also begin to move rugby, I think, into the modern world. I touched about it already. Rugby is a game which has brilliant values, brilliant traditions, but sometimes those values and traditions can get in the way of progress. And rugby turned professional in whatever it was in the 90s, and there are still elements where the game just isn't run particularly well. If this can help move it into modernising itself, into expanding that commercial reach, then that's going to be a really, really positive thing, and moving it closer into the world of professional sports marketing, which if you look at particularly American sports, I think are really, really good at this. And so's Aussie rules actually in Australia as well. But those sports are really good at marketing themselves, at making them appealing, and just run really, really well. So I hope that maybe rugby can move towards where they are. Also, as I said already, putting the players front and centre. It comes back to those rugby values, but there is a feeling in rugby that no one wants to be the star. It's not good at building people as stars. It's not good at building rivalries. People want to talk it down. A number of the coaches do, the players do as well. But I think if we can embrace that, you look at Bristol's first game of the season, this season against Bath in the Gallagher Premiership, where they had, I think it was a sellout. It was certainly close to a sellout at Ashton Gate, and it was the return of Ellis Genge. It was the boy who comes from Bristol, comes from a very working class area of Bristol, who came through the club's academy, moved on to Leicester, him returning to the club, and he was front and centre of all the marketing, all the social media campaign that the club built around that. That's an example of what rugby needs to do more. It needs to embrace these rivalries, and it's something that does happen in Drive to Survive really well as well. They embrace the rivalries between the drivers. They want controversy. They want storylines. Whereas in rugby, and there's certain teams that are a lot worse than this than others, and certain players as well, but it's all about the team. It's all about performing on the weekend, and we get served up these kind of platitudes on a weekly basis which don't do anything. They don't grow the game. It's incredibly boring to listen to. Let's embrace the rivalries. Joe Marler was awesome about this as well. Think back to the semi-finals of the Gallagher Premiership last year. Harlequins against Saracens. London rivalry. Harlequins, the more traditional side, against Saracens, who have been dominant in recent years and who have been penalised for the salary cap. Joe Marler talking about those titles not counting, talking about the Saracens ground and it not being any good. We've got to love that. We've got to embrace that. We've got to use that to grow the game and drive it on. So I would be fully behind that. But as I said at the top of the video, it has to be done right. It can't be a half-assed measure. It can't be people worrying about certain access and the changing room, for example, being a sacred space. It always winds me up when you hear that about protecting the changing room. Rugby's not too bad at it. Sometimes you do get cameras in there at halftime, which don't necessarily give you too much. I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. But, you know, if you think about how teams, and loads of teams now will post a video on their social media after a win of the team singing the club song and putting that up on their social media for their fans to enjoy. I feel like we should have got past the point where the change rooms are that sacred space you can't get into. Let's get cameras in there. Let's get access. Let's tell stories. Let's build narratives, and let's grow the game, because I bet it'll be absolutely fascinating and it would be brilliant for the sport. So it has to be fully behind the scenes. It can't be a watered down documentary. It can't be, even I would say, some of the all or nothing documentaries on Amazon Prime, like at Arsenal and Spurs and Man City, where it's a little bit of club propaganda. You know, the club have probably had the final say on what gets published. I want to see someone independent have executive producing abilities on this to get the access to tell those stories. I think that would be absolutely awesome. And as I say, stop pretending the dressing room is some sort of sacred place. Those are kind of my original thoughts on this idea. Few things to unpick in there. Hope you have stayed this long into the video, because I think there was some important bits towards the end as well. But drop a comment down below. What do you think about the idea of Netflix having a series around the 2023 Six Nations in the style of Formula One Drive to Survive, following every team, telling those storylines? I think it would be absolutely awesome. Remember to subscribe to the channel as well, and like the video if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.